Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, a massive search operation continues in Washington after a passenger jet with 64 people aboard collided mid-air with a military helicopter. Authorities say no one is thought to have survived. In line with the terms of the Gaza ceasefire deal, Hamas hands over a third batch of hostages to Israel. In exchange, 110 Palestinian prisoners and detainees will be released. Also coming up, we'll be speaking to Enrique Tarrio, who is the former head of the Proud Boys, who's now a free man. He was amongst the 1,500 people pardoned by President Trump for their roles in the January 6th Capitol riots. And the White House seeks to dispel theories about last month's mysterious drone sightings in the night skies above New Jersey, while the Trump administration says that no hostile forces had been at work. Hello and welcome to the program. We begin in Washington, where a massive search effort is underway following on from a mid-air collision between an American Airlines passenger jet and a US Army Black Hawk helicopter. This happened as the plane was coming into land at Reagan National Airport. Well, an estimated 30 bodies have been recovered so far, and officials say they do not believe there will have been any survivors. Well, there were 64 passengers and crew on board that jet, and there were 3 soldiers on the helicopter. Well, there's not been a fatal passenger plane crash in the United States since February of 2009. However, a series of near-miss incidents in recent years have raised some serious safety concerns. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Matthew Cappucci, a meteorologist who witnessed the collision, who joins us now from DC. Matthew, thank you for joining us. I gather you've got a balcony that overlooks the airport, and I'm assuming you got a very clear view. Just tell us what you saw.
Yeah, most definitely. So to kind of orient folks right now, I'm on my apartment building's rooftop, which is only roughly about 1.5 kilometers northwest of the airport. The airport's runways are right there. There is the control tower where everything sort of went down. And of course, you see the nation's capital behind me. There's the Washington Monument, the U.S. Capitol, where the president was recently inaugurated right over there. Now, this incident took place at about 8:56 p.m. last night local time. I did not see the initial explosion, but what I can tell you is, when you live this close to the airport, you're used to planes taking off and landing pretty much above you at any given point. You hear the sounds all night long. Right after 9 o'clock, it was eerily silent. The skies were just devoid of any airplane noise. And instead, it was a cacophony of sirens, nonstop sirens. At that point, 19 flights that were set to land at Reagan National were diverted over to Dulles Airport. Elsewhere, there were flights that just never took off towards Reagan. And at the same time, crews from Maryland, D.C., and Virginia all rapidly responded. But unfortunately, the collision not only was too destructive, but the water temperatures of only 1 or 2 degrees Celsius near freezing made it so that if there were any survivors, they simply would have succumbed pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's what we're being told by the authorities as well. And I'm just wondering, how did you realize, at what point did you realize that what had just happened was in fact a mid-air collision involving a passenger plane?
When I first sort of knew something was wrong was seeing how many sirens, or rather how many police lights were present on both sides of the street, rather the river. Typically, when we see motorcades, presidential motorcades, we see them go by, but there were just kilometers worth of police lights on both this side and the eastern side of the Potomac River, which I've never seen happen before. And at that point, that coupled with the planes just not taking off and landing, was obvious something very wrong had happened. I could not possibly fathom the idea of this being the worst U.S. collision since at least 2009, happening in the nation's capital, only 3 kilometers away from the White House, at the headquarters of the National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA.
And just a stone's throw as well from the Pentagon. I mean, it certainly looks very cold where you are. You've already talked about the freezing temperatures in the river. I'm just wondering, were there any adverse weather conditions or visibility issues last night?
By the way, that is the Pentagon, so you're exactly right. We're so close to the Pentagon. But what I can say, weather was not a factor at all. By the way, you might notice the first aircraft of the day is finally just taking off. There was a ground stop at Reagan National until 11 o'clock local time this morning. There goes the first Delta flight of the day, taxiing, preparing for takeoff. But weather was not a factor at all. Visibilities were great. Temperatures, wind conditions, everything was perfect for flying. What we believe happened based on air traffic control data is that the passenger plane, which had 64 people aboard, was cleared to land on runway 33, which is a diagonal one that goes from the southeast to northwest. It's roughly about 5,000 feet long. Smaller planes, usually like the 2x2 regional jets, use that runway. It was cleared to land. It was on the flight path. And to do so, those planes sort of have to take a last minute left turn, if you will, to line up with the runway. Air traffic control had basically asked the helicopter to wait, confirm it could see the aircraft, the airplane, wait, and then proceed after. The helicopter acknowledged those instructions, but then evidently didn't follow through. So what may have happened is the helicopter was focused on the wrong airplane, erroneously believed they were clear to go, and unfortunately that resulted in tragedy.
Yeah, and there's a lot of air traffic in that particular part of the United States, lots of airports nearby. Some reports suggest, some people we've been speaking to have suggested it's quite a difficult airport to approach Reagan National. And I'm just wondering whether you've ever heard in the past people raising any issues about safety in the area surrounding the airport.
Definitely. I mean, I can tell you firsthand that the airspace here is just so heavily utilized. You have the president 3 kilometers away from here that requires special security clearances and restrictions nearby that prevents certain routing from around the area. So you have all the planes on very dense tracks that oftentimes overlap with military Navy operations. It's like a 3D jigsaw puzzle, if you will, at any given moment. And if one little piece of the jigsaw puzzle is out of line, the consequences can be deadly. And unfortunately, we saw that last night. I can tell you there have been times I've been taking off and landing at Reagan National Airport and seen helicopters out the window. You would not see aircraft in that close of proximity at any other airport in the country. But here in the nation's capital, you know, we've sort of worried about this for years. The chance is increasing of something going wrong. And last night, something went horribly wrong.
So what you're saying makes it sound like there was perhaps amongst people, you know, certainly people who live around where you live, which is so near the airport, that this was almost an inevitability that at some point there would be tragedy in the skies above Reagan National.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say I'm terribly surprised. It's horribly distressing to see, but just leaving that many opportunities for something to go wrong simply because of how crowded this airspace is, notwithstanding the fact that this airport handles 25 million people a year with only usually 2 runways operating at the same time. That's comparatively few compared to other airports across the country that have 4, 5, 6 active runways, not necessarily all at the same time, but configurations. So Reagan National does a lot with a little bit of space, and suffice to say, it can be risky at times. With that, I actually have to do additional coverage, but again, we'll have updates throughout the day today here in DC, and my heart goes out for the victims and the families.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Matthew Cappucci, really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we can now speak to an eyewitness who is a resident of the Washington, D.C. area. Abadi Ismail joins us now from D.C. Abadi, thank you for joining us. Just tell us, first of all, what you saw and what you heard, how you became aware of this crash.
So I have a point of advantage, a view advantage from where I live at Buzzard Points with a clear shots of the Potomac River, the Reagan Airport's, the military base. I was getting ready to go to bed last night around 8:50 p.m. when I heard bang bang around 8:50 p.m. It's something unusual, something you don't normally hear only you hear it in a war zone, on a movie action. But yeah, it's absolutely caught my attention. So I immediately turned around and I looked over the window to see what's happening, and that's when I saw some smokes coming out from the south side of Reagan Airport. That's exactly where the Washington Sailing Marina, or the path of the helicopter, and unfortunately the American Airlines jets. So that was somewhere around 8:50 p.m. A few minutes later, I've seen most of the resources of DC, from the U.S. Coast Guard, DC Police, DC Parks Police, Arlington Police. Every one of them have been navigating toward the crash sites. I still did not understand what's happening. And if you see in my videos, I immediately took shots of the chopper trying to look for any visual evidence on the river. So yeah, that was somewhere around 8:55 p.m. And then the news started to break up online that some reports that two planes collided, helicopter, military plane collided. So very unusual scene for the DC area. Keep in mind that the DC area, it serves three major airports: Reagan airports, Dallas airports, and Baltimore airports. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a pilot. She was telling me that the planes have always the right of way, so they are not sure how the helicopter did not send advisory, which was very dangerous in that case. And they also say that this is have been happening with them a lot, that they fly closer to helicopters for so many times around the DC airspace. Given the fact we're in the DC with so many government agencies, like I'm in this river area each and every day. I'm a master captain by the Coast Guard, so I go through that river daily. And what you notice on a daily basis, most of the plane path goes from north to south. The north coming north, going south, and landing at DCA. For that particular event yesterday, because of the wind and other variants and other factors, the plane was flying south and landing north. And I think the helicopter was coming from the other direction. So if you notice behind me right here, right now, you see two commercial vessels from the Sea Cruise here in DC. It's trying to help with the rescue mission right now, recovering bodies. The water temperature is somewhere around 39 degrees. I can tell you with high degree of certainties that this river has a high tide and high current, meaning water from upstream coming downstream goes flowing very fast.
Okay.
So it's been almost 12 hours, more than 12 hours since the crash happened. And yet we need to find out what happened so far in terms of recovery missions, rescue and mission. So if that's the case,
yeah, can I just interrupt you?
really-
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because I want to pick up on some of the points you're making, Abadi. Really interesting points. Where the plane came down, I mean, it sounds to me like it didn't come down near any houses. And that must be a blessing in the sense that if it had hit a populated area, there would have been casualties on the ground, wouldn't there? That didn't happen, did it?
The crash site is exactly 1 mile by boat from the Pentagon and half a mile from a very dense, heavy and dense area. It's called the Crystal City, full of shopping malls, residential buildings, high tower, Amazon HQ2, and so many other businesses, just half a mile. So you have a half a mile to the city line and about a mile to the Pentagon. So you can imagine, had this happened over the city, Arlington or DC, it would have been catastrophic. But it happened on the east side of the river by the military base, where the water is relatively deeper than the west side of the river. We're talking about 24 feet. Had this crash happened on the west side of the river, we're talking about a shallow water, 4 to 5 feet. Okay. So yes, it's very interesting dynamic with the Potomac because the water average, the depth average is 24 feet, about 400 miles stretch. And the shallow water is mainly near the airports with a lot of tree logs and debris that are streaming from upstream down. So I'm waiting. We're waiting for some news to hear about the rescue, about any recovery. From my understanding yesterday, that the DC Park Police were able to recover 4 people. I'm not sure if they're alive or not. So there was some conflicted news of what's happening. But this is where we are as the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the authorities are saying it doesn't look like there are any survivors. They're not expecting to find any survivors. And I'm just wondering, in terms of what you can see out of your window and what you saw and heard last night, I mean, are you surprised or unsurprised by the news that it's very unlikely that anyone survived this?
So one thing I want to mention is since the inauguration day, which was about 10 days, the Potomac is frozen, totally frozen. So what I've witnessed today is airboats boats that are able to maneuver the ice and able to get to the crash scene. And this is unusual for the DC area to have the Potomac River in a complete ice sheet. So this is add up to the difficulties to get to the to the site, to the recovery mission, looking down the river for within 3, 4, 5, 6 mile radius. I am shocked. I am surprised. But my fellow pilots that came on air, that I talked to them online, they're not surprised because they have witnessed helicopters, very close call to commercial pilots. And if anyone need to be blamed is the air traffic controller, plus the helicopters that are navigating in the same area and the same path of commercial jets.
And just lastly, I mean, what were the weather conditions like? Because we've had various reports that obviously from what you're saying, it's extremely cold there. Is it windy? Were the conditions in any way adverse conditions that may have perhaps played a part in this tragedy?
So the temperature is rising up. We've definitely hit 50 degrees mark the last 24 hours. However, the water temperature, as I checked, I went down, I had to check my navigation on my boat. It was 39.9 degrees, which is extremely cold for hypothermia. We're talking about within minutes, you will have hypothermia. It's inevitable. So 12 hours, fast forward, no sources, no news on any recovery, any survivors, and that could lead to either hypothermia or nobody has survived the crash. It's really unfortunate.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. Abadi Ismail, eyewitness of that tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for more analysis on what happened, we can speak now to retired Brigadier General John Tykert, former Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for the Air Force for International Affairs, who joins us now from DC. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. It doesn't look like anyone survived this tragedy, does it?
No, Tom, it's really sad when the authorities transition from search and recovery, or search and rescue, to recovery, and that's what they have done recently. And sadly, we suspect that all 67 that were involved in this will have perished.
We've been speaking to eyewitnesses, and it doesn't sound like anyone was killed on the ground. I mean, had this happened a couple of kilometers away, it could have been a very different story, couldn't it?
It is, Tom. This is a very congested area. Because the planes were landing to the north, this final approach path took it primarily up the Potomac River just south of Washington, D.C., and all of the wreckage ended up in the water, as far as we can tell, just between the Reagan National Airport and Joint Base Anacostia Bowling across the Potomac.
This raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? What happened? I mean, probably lots of speculation, but at this stage, what do we know about that US Army Black Hawk helicopter? It was carrying out a training flight. What's your understanding about what's happened?
It was, and Tom, this is a very congested piece of airspace, but it's also a very particularly prescribed piece of airspace. And so all of the helicopters that fly in the Washington, D.C. area are highly qualified and specifically trained for this type of congested airspace. And while the Black Hawk was on a training mission, it was on a training mission for one of the 3 primary missions of helicopters in Washington, D.C., which is Distinguished Visitor Transport, or National Emergency Response, or protecting Washington, D.C. And right now, as the investigators start standing up their processes, they're going to be gathering all of the perishable information. And likely the first thing that they will look for are the tapes of communication between air traffic control and these 2 aircraft to see if there was confusion, what the root cause would have been.
Yeah, I mean, one of the 2 black boxes, we understand, has been recovered. The other one, not yet. They're usually, I gather, quite easy to find because they have tracking devices on them. But what sort of precise clues could those black boxes contain?
Because this is tending towards confusion of communication, then not only will we have gathered, or the investigators, all of the recordings between the radio calls, but those black boxes or flight recorders will have captured what was being said within the cockpits. And so if it was confusion because of communication, trying to trace down what was said, what was thought about, what were they looking for, and see if that tends towards the root cause of this horrific accident.
Yeah, I mean, had this been two passenger planes, it would have been unlikely to have occurred, this crash, wouldn't it? Because they contain devices precisely to stop mid-air collisions. But because it was a passenger plane and a military helicopter, is that where perhaps, is that the link in the chain that made this such a deadly accident?
I think there's a couple pieces to that, Tom. One of them is that there are two landing runways, one to the north and one to the northwest at Reagan National. And if the helicopter pilot thought that that aircraft was landing on one and was looking for an aircraft that was to be landing on that one, then they wouldn't have necessarily been looking as they should at the other. But it is also the case that based on the nature of the flight profile, that passenger aircraft was very predictably in slow, short final flight to prepare for landing at Washington, D.C.'s airport. And the helicopter had a bit more freedom of maneuver, but they were in positive communication with the same air traffic control that the airliner was on. And again, going back to the chain of communication is going to be so critical in unraveling this tragedy and this mystery.
Yeah, the tragedy happened, we were being told by one of our eyewitnesses just a moment ago, a very short distance away from the Pentagon. And ironically, it's the Pentagon that's carrying out the investigation into this. They've launched the investigation. How long do these investigations typically take? When might we have some more sort of concrete answers as to what happened?
Well, Tom, you're right about the geography. This crash happened about 3 miles away from the Capitol, the White House, and the Pentagon. There are going to be two different investigations that go on here. One is going to be led by the Department of Transportation, or the Transportation Safety Board, and then the other one will be run by the United States Army. And they typically take 3, 4, or 5 weeks until they have gathered the data, they have assessed what happened, and then most importantly have assessed why it happened to get to root causes and causal factors to try to prevent anything like this from happening again.
And just picking up on what you were saying about how congested the skies are above the US Capitol, do you think this is likely to perhaps trigger a rethink in terms of air traffic safety precautions, air traffic safety norms in that area, given that the DC area does have 3 major airports, at least, within a very short distance of each other?
It does, Tom, and there have already been talks in the political sphere before this accident about concerns of congestion at Reagan National Airport. I suspect this is going to re-spark some of those concerns. But in almost all of these investigations, there are process, policy, and procedural changes that will stem after the root cause is determined to try to figure out what is the best way to make sure in this very congested airspace, as you described, that something like this doesn't happen again, and that we're managing the volume of traffic in and out of DC to make sure that we mitigate the chance of this type of thing happening again.
President Trump was very quick to take to social media. He said this tragedy was entirely preventable, or words to that effect. I mean, it certainly looks that way, doesn't it?
Tom, it does. This was a very clear weather nighttime situation at about 9 o'clock at night that from video cameras that showed the crash from north of the crash site looking south, you could clearly see the lights on these two aircraft even from that distance. And so thinking about where the confusion happened or the breakdown in communication, like President Trump suspects, is probably where the investigators are going to start.
The last deadly major air crash involving a commercial airline in the United States, I believe, was in 2009. I mean, that was more than 5 years ago, and in that accident, some 50 people were killed. When you consider that 3 million people fly in and out of US airports every single day, it suggests that on the whole, air travel in the United States is safer perhaps than it's ever been, doesn't it?
Tom, it is, and part of the reason for that is that when we do have these accidents, we are judicious about getting to the root cause, the causal factors, and the findings, and changing processes and procedures that this won't happen again. And I think that as you consider the trade-off between driving or flying, our air travel system is extremely safe. But when big events happen like this, it is tragic. It shakes everybody's confidence in the system, which is why the investigators need to be extremely rigorous and quick in getting to the root causes to assure the public that they've resolved the situations or the problems that caused this disaster.
I mean, to the investigators, what are the obvious questions that need to be raised at this stage? What would you ask them to focus their efforts on?
Tom, there are three major stages of the investigation. The first is to gather all the perishable data so that you can have it on hand when you investigate. The next is then to piece together exactly what happened. And the final is to get to those root causes. Some of that perishable information includes training records, maintenance records, personnel records, and then all of the communication that went on between air traffic control and those aircraft, not just in the seconds before the crash, but in the minutes before the crash, to see if there was a root cause that led to confusion way earlier than the crash. And then gathering all of the debris once the bodies are recovered and starting to piece together the aircraft and using those flight data recorders or black boxes to trace the details of what was going on in the cockpit and with the machines before the crash and during the crash will be all of the things that these bodies will be charged with investigating to quickly get to the root cause.
And in terms of ruling theories out at this stage, and again, this is a bit of speculation, but I mean, there's nothing to suggest, is there was any foul play here, and nothing to suggest that there was any foreign or hostile force in any way involved in this?
Tom, there's no indication that that was the case. I suspect that the intel agencies are going to not rule that out until they gather a bit more data. That's not the specific charge of the mishap investigators, though it is an incidental issue that they will consider. But other bodies will be running in parallel to make sure that there was no specific nefarious activity that was a part of leading to this disaster.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Really appreciate it. Retired Brigadier General John Tygart, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In other news, Israeli hostage and IDF soldier Agam Berger has been returned to Israel for an initial medical assessment. Well, this move is part of Israel's multi-phase deal with Hamas, which has already seen the release of some hostages from Gaza and Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Well, negotiations between Israel and Hamas are expected to continue during this first 6-week phase of the deal. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Dan Meridor, former Israeli Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Intelligence, who joins us from Jerusalem. Great to have you with us again here on Al Arabiya News, sir.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you. There were some pretty chaotic scenes, just judging from the video footage we saw. They came from southern Gaza in the city of Khan Yunis during the process of releasing some of these hostages. I gather 2 Israelis and 5 Thai nationals were in that particular batch. Why was everything so chaotic there?
I genuinely don't know. It's quite frightening, I have to say. I think of the hostages who are being brought by the Hamas or Islamic Jihad people, I don't know. And I think when they see the multitudes of people around them shouting and threatening, it should have been quite terrible for them. I don't know why it was that chaotic. But once they got to the Red Cross people, then to the Israelis side, it was okay. It was quite tense. The tension was quite high when I watched this on television. Quite frightening, I have to say.
Yeah, this is the 3rd hostage prisoner exchange of this particular ceasefire in Gaza. And aside from that chaos that we saw on our screens, would you say that the 19th of January ceasefire deal is in fact holding up?
More or less so, yes, but it's very touchy and very complicated. There are phases to come. Unfortunately, it was not a deal for all at once, which I would have advocated to end up the war and give all the hostages back. But for all sorts of reasons, they did not agree on that. And it's quite a gradual deal that will take many more weeks. It's quite troubling. I hope it will go all right. But as you saw today, you can never tell.
Yeah, indeed. And for the benefit of our viewers, really, because it's quite confusing, this deal, to keep track of where we are. We're 11 days into what is a 42-day phase 1. Then we go into phase 2. Does it look like we're on track for phase 2?
It looks like it, but there are negotiations that have to be held now about how phase 2 is going to play out. I don't know what's behind the scenes. I hope that all sides concerned do all that they can, not to find why the other side is wrong, but how to get it through. It's an anomaly of 440 days. People were kidnapped from their homes, from their beds, are in the hostages and kidnapped by Hamas, and we need them back home. And there's a deal that is, I have to say, quite a heavy deal. Not an easy decision to release from prison hundreds and hundreds of people who were convicted for terrorism. And there was objection to it in some parts of the population, but I think the government made the right choice. Heavy one, risky one, but the obligation, the duty to release our people from prison, from captivity, is overriding. And I think it's a good decision. It's still touchy. I hope it will go on all right.
Yeah, as I was saying, more than 480 days in captivity for these individuals who are going about their business on the 7th of October, unaware that they would be held in captivity for 15 months. Is there, though, a sense of some muted celebration there in Israel today at seeing those individuals walk free and return to their families?
Definitely. I think the country as a whole watched TV tonight, on the networks, and I believe not many were with dry eyes. I think people were quite emotional and weeping because it was very emotional, very touchy. People waiting for them and fighting for the release in demonstration and whatnot for, as you said, almost 15 months. People, most of them were taken from their homes. Today, a man that was returned is 80 years old. To be in captivity, 80 years old, for 460 or 70 days is really amazing. I'm happy he survived. And the problem is, on one side, we are very happy, really very happy that they are home, but still we have 87 people are still there. And we need them to come home. And it may take some months, and until everybody is back home, alive and some dead. We don't exactly know who and who. The majority is alive, we presume, and some are dead, and the bodies should be returned to burial. So the whole thing is quite heavy and tragic, but there are points of joy, and people rejoice in the scenes that you see on television.
Yeah, I mean, as you paint a picture of what must have been a really, really traumatic ordeal for those people, for their families, indeed for anybody in the country who's been following this ordeal. I just want to ask you, what sort of a state, according to the reports you're hearing and reading, what sort of a state are those individuals in, physically and psychologically, when they get home?
Well, nothing has been officially released, but the feeling is that they are better than what we suspected or what we were afraid would be. They look okay. What is inside, we don't know. There are some stories coming out of previously released people, a lady who spoke of how she was sexually assaulted, and other quite troubling stories. So we don't know the whole story, but they look on the face of it okay. Nobody was brought to hospital with emergency. This was the positive side of it.
It's extraordinary as well to think that 15 months on from the 7th of October, and after the amount of firepower that's been used, the amount of the number of lives that have been lost on both sides, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that Hamas still has a presence there in the Gaza Strip. They haven't been completely defeated, have they?
Well, you see, I am not in the habit of attacking my government abroad, but I would say this: if I were their government today, which evidently I'm not, I'm enjoying talking to Arabia rather than being in the government. And I would have tried to not only hit Hamas badly, which they should have been done, but try to create an alternative rule, mainly by the Palestinian Authority, with the help of other Arab countries, maybe Egypt, Emirates, Saudis, and try to replace the Hamas leadership. Because if you don't replace them, you stay with what you see. They were hit badly. Unfortunately, many civilians were hit as well, which is what happens when you have war within civilian population, with all the rockets are run from there. It's a tragic story, no doubt. You're right in that. But hitting them militarily is one thing. Politically, there should have been an alternative rule. Somebody needs to rule these people, so to provide them with water, with food, with everything else. And I thought that the Biden offer years ago a year ago or so, to try to build this alternative with the Palestinian Authority. They are weak. I know they're not strong. They hate the Hamas. I know the story. But still, if they were helped by some Arab countries, there might have been a better solution by now, and Hamas might not have been that much in power.
What do you read into the fact that today's release of hostages happened quite close to the home of the deceased Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar? Does that give us a clearer idea of where some of the other hostages might be being held? I mean, what do you read into that?
I suppose, I don't know. I suppose that the location may be known, some of the locations, but if you try to free them, to release them with the military action, they may all be killed. Because they are not free there. They are kept by prison, by ward, who may kill them if you approach. So maybe even if they know the locations, which we might know, I'm not sure, the option of releasing them by force, by commando unit, may not be a viable one because they may be killed by their guards. So the need to have a deal was clear to me and to others, in spite of the heavy prices, in spite of the fact that Hamas kept them, like at home, if God forbid your wife or your kids are kidnapped by somebody and he wants ransoms. It's not just, it's awful, but you want them free and you pay whatever it needs. Although after that you try to find the people who did it, but we were in that situation. Our families were taken from home, children, elderly, normal, regular men and women, and there was no way to release them by military action with reasonable success and less risk. So we had to pay a heavy price. And it's not over yet. I hope that it will get through as smooth as possible, to the benefit of those people who were kidnapped and to all of us, to stop this bloody war.
Politically, lots has been happening. President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, held a meeting yesterday, I gather, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. President Trump has also invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to the White House next week. I'm just wondering how you see these two men working together and how you see events unfolding with President Trump now back in the White House.
One of these two men I know quite closely, Mr. Netanyahu. We were together many years, now we are not together. The other man, President Trump, the new American president, I dare not guess what he may do. I can't decipher his activity. He's a surprise. Hopefully for the better, but I have no idea what he wants to do and how he's going to do it. I think many of us were surprised with some actions that he took. I hope he will do the right thing and will be able to get it through. I think it seems he wants this over and all hostages back and Hamas not ruling us. This is what they say. If he and the Israeli Prime Minister get their act together and the others play into this game in that sense, it's going to be all right. But I don't bet anything on this because I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have to wait next week and maybe we meet again on El Arabi after that.
All right, well, we look forward to that. And we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Dan Meridor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The former Proud Boys leader, Enrique Tarrio, has now returned home to Miami after being released from a federal prison. This after President Donald Trump granted him a pardon, together with more than 1,500 others accused of having had a role in the January 6th attacks on the US Capitol. Well, Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years in prison. That is the longest of all the sentences connected to January the 6th, even though he wasn't actually in Washington at the time of the Capitol attacks. He was, however, found guilty of seditious conspiracy. That is a charge that is very rarely used. Well, Enrique joins us now from Florida. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Just want to ask you, first of all, how does it feel to be free?
I mean, I got to tell you that it feels amazing to get my freedom back after thinking that I was going to spend the rest of my life in a federal prison. You know, and I'd like to thank, you know, my family, my mother first and foremost, and President Trump for granting the pardon when he saw the injustice that was happening. As you said, I wasn't at the Capitol, and you know, it wasn't a jury of my peers that convicted me. It was people that think differently, and I respect their opinion, but it's not fair to me, and it's not fair to them to seat them in a jury in a case that has a lot of strong political sentiment.
Sure, and you mentioned your mom there, Zuni Duarte, and we spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, and I'm just, before I pick up on some of those points, I mean, she must be pretty pleased to have you back home, and she fought really hard on your behalf. I'm just wondering, when you were in prison, did you feel the encouragement that she was giving you?
Yeah, so throughout my whole time incarcerated, my mom wasn't a very political person beforehand. The most political thing she did was go to the voting booth and check a box. Specifically in 2016, she voted for Hillary Clinton because she wanted a woman to be elected, but she wasn't political at all until she saw what happened to her son. And the support she gave me led me through this entire time of 3 years. I spent almost my entire time in solitary confinement. So the small amount of times that I called her helped me get through it. And I'm very thankful that I have a warrior mom. And you know, now I know where I get it from.
Well, she's certainly been very busy, and I can vouch for that while you were incarcerated still. She told us you were made a scapegoat. Is that how you see things?
Yeah, I think that's how I see things, and I think, in my case specifically, I think that's how most Americans see it. You know, I can't condone people that went to the Capitol and put their hands on officers, and the president was very clear. He said he was going to go case by case and check every single, and that's what the president did. He checked every single one of these cases. It wasn't for their actions that he pardoned. It was for the miscarriage of justice in the process that they were pardoned. But it was politically motivated. Did I say some things? Did I celebrate what happened at the Capitol that day, that on January 6th? Absolutely, I did. If that's a crime, then I am guilty of it. But I wasn't charged for celebrating. I was charged for sedition, which is one step under treason. And that's why they gave me 22 years.
Okay, and we're going to pick up on some of those points in a moment, but I just want to, quickly before we move on, I want to ask you about your life in prison. I mean, you say you were in solitary for quite a lot of the time. Were you, on the whole, well treated? I mean, if that's even possible when you're in solitary confinement, or were you singled out, do you think, for mistreatment in prison as well?
So typically, it's called the SHU, right? That's what solitary is called. It's called the segregating housing unit. And usually their maximum amount of time that they, by their own policy and by what I saw, the maximum they put an inmate in there for, and it's usually for disciplinary reasons, is 15 days. In my case, again, I spent almost 3 years in solitary confinement. I went to a facility because I kept getting moved. I went to a specific facility in Petersburg, Virginia, where I didn't have a toothbrush. I didn't have toothpaste. I didn't have soap. I didn't have a shower, no razor for 3 weeks. So was I treated differently? Absolutely. And I'm not going to sit here and cry about it now because my freedom's my freedom now. But it's the conditions that me and a lot of these J6ers went through is abysmal.
Let's turn the clock back a bit and talk a bit about what happened before January 6th. And I'd like to talk a bit about the Proud Boys, described by one British newspaper as a far-right militia group, labeled by the Anti-Defamation League as, quote, misogynistic, Islamophobic, transphobic, anti-immigration. What's your definition? What did the Proud Boys stand for?
So I hate identity politics, but we do have one of our tenets is anti-racism. We don't care what color or creed you are. We also don't care what religion you are, whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Catholic, it doesn't matter to us. All we ask of our members when they join is that they go out once a month to drink beer. We're not a militia. We don't train. We're not I can't say we're a political group because that is not the focus of our organization. Our focus of our organization is just simply to make better men. Now, are a lot of our members political? Yes. But I'd say the grand majority of the guys, they're kind of like my mom back then. The most political thing that they've done is check a box every 2 years.
Yeah, but your mum voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Were there any Proud Boys who would perhaps have done the same thing? Was it a predominantly Republican group?
It's a predominantly conservative Republican group, but we do have, like, their oddballs that voted for Hillary Clinton, or they were big. Mainly it's Bernie Sanders supporters. I think there is a nexus there with support. They're no longer Bernie supporters now. I think 2024, this past election changed the narrative a lot on that. But there is Proud Boys with differing political views, and it ranges, but it is predominantly conservative.
Okay, and before...
Really dominantly conservative.
Dominantly conservative, okay, got that. Of course, before January the 6th, so casting our minds now back to autumn of 2020, President Trump, he was obviously not president at the time. Yes, he was president at the time, excuse me. He told your group, the Proud Boys, to stand back and stand by. That was following on from a rally where you'd been present. And I'm just wondering what you think he meant by that, and whether you think that by your group showing up at the Capitol on the 6th of January, you were serving his best interests.
I think what the president meant by that, and also if you listen to the entirety of what happened, that exchange, it was a lot of shouting over each other, and Biden was the one that actually mentioned the Proud Boys. So the president's response was stand back, stand by. Now, what I think that meant is stand by me, and we have, and he's come through like he's promised, promises made, promises kept. Now, as far as do I regret the Proud Boys being over there at the Capitol that day? Looking back at it, yes, but we weren't going over there for nefarious reasons. We were going over there to listen to the president speak. And I actually, right after the president finished speaking at 1:15, and just for context, the Capitol was breached at 12:58 p.m. So the president was speaking while the breaches were happening. But I was actually slated to speak at 1:30 and at 2:30 on stages away from the Capitol, and at 3:30 in front of the Capitol. We also had we had a meeting planned for 3:30. So I don't know what when the prosecutors say, well, he planned to do this, all this thing. I don't understand how they thought that with all these plans that I actually had, I planned to storm the Capitol in less than 22 minutes and go and have a speech and then have a beer with the boys and listen to Michael Graves, lead singer of the Misfits, do an unplugged session at a hotel room.
But you weren't there at all, were you, on January 6th?
No, I was not there at all. And they took about a year and change to come pick me up after January 6th, so they just didn't have the evidence. The evidence that they used to the grand jury indictment was a document that, again, it wasn't a nefarious document. It was called 1776 returns. The government admits that I never opened that document. It was sent to me, but I never opened that document, never shared it, never read it. So already the prosecutor started on a bad foot, and they used that document to get a grand jury indictment for me. And, the people of DC don't really like me or my guys. We go protest there all the time for different reasons. And they indicted me. So, but you could indict a ham sandwich, is the saying here in the States when it comes to prosecuting the citizens of the country.
Was there a rallying cry? Did you feel like you had to be there? Did your boys, as you call them, did they feel like they had to be there on January 6th? And if so, where did that rallying cry come from?
I don't think that there was like we had to be there. I like going to Trump events. I thoroughly enjoy it. I love going to the nation's capital as long as I stay within the confines of the National Mall. And I traveled. That's what I did. I traveled and I spoke at events, and we did many events leading up to the election for that full year of 2020. So it's not that we felt like we had to. It's just we enjoy it.
You've called for retribution against some of those who convicted you and put you in prison. I just wonder what you mean by that and what you want to see President Trump do next.
So to clarify, and I always say it when I said retribution, I always clarify in the next sentence right over, because it is a form of retribution. I want investigation. No violence. I cannot condone violence against any human being for any reason whatsoever. But I do want investigations, and I think that some form of reparations are also in order for what we went through. Because it's not just me. There's 1,600 of us. And I think some form of reparations is required because it was political. It was political. Anybody who says it isn't, I suggest that they research a little bit more about my case. They might not agree with my views or how I say things, but to want another human being in prison for their political beliefs is outrageous to me.
But it was, the day was so unprecedented in so many ways. Symbolically, it was hugely important. You know, the seat of democracy in the United States of America was under attack. There were people there, armed in many cases with tasers, baseball bats, chemical sprays, calling for the vice president to be hanged, storming into the building. A couple of people lost their lives, some on the day, some subsequently. It was a horrific, I covered it live on television for a French TV channel. It was the scenes that none of us ever imagined we'd see. So do you understand the need to have given it unprecedented judicial treatment as a situation as a whole? Because people did die, and it could have been an awful lot worse had the police not done what they did.
I wholeheartedly agree with you in the fact that it was a day that's going to go down in history. I don't agree with that being done in order to, I don't know. There's a lot of individuals had a lot of different motivations for why they did it. I honestly think it was a protest gone wrong. And you said, do I understand why there was additional judicial review? And I also understand that because it was unprecedented. But if they were going to do it, and it was a sensitive subject, a sensitive topic, they had to do it right. They had to do it by the book. We already saw that the Supreme Court already threw out the main case before any of the pardons, threw out the main charges that were used for January 6th, which is, I think it's called impeding an official proceeding, obstructing an official proceeding. That was thrown out. If you want to go and look impartial, I would have suggested to the Department of Justice to go about it the right way, and also change the venues of some of these trials, because me and you wouldn't be having this conversation. I think if justice was truly served by the DOJ, I think I would have been acquitted of all my charges. I think some January 6ers would have been hit with some of these charges and they admit it. They'll admit, look, I did this wrong, but I don't deserve 10, 15 years in prison.
Okay, Enrique, I'm being told we're out of time, but I just want to ask you very quickly before we let you go. What have you got planned next? What are you going to do now? And you haven't had long to think about this because you've only been free for a week or so, but what do you think you're going to do next?
Well, I've had 3 years to think about what my future holds, and I did a lot of writing. I made a lot of plans. But 2 months ago, I decided to take an eraser to all that and just live my life for the next 2 months, and let the emotion out, and then really strategize and think what I'm going to do. I've been asked, am I going to get into politics, maybe run for office? That's a possibility, but it's not a priority to me right now. My priority is family, and maybe one day when I do announce that I might be running for office, I'll come back on this show and I'll let you guys know.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We hope you will come back and see us. Keep us updated. Enrique, Tarrio, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, turning our attention to our final story of today's program. Late last year, drones buzzing over New Jersey sparked panic and speculation, with some residents believing they were Chinese spy tools, others saying they could be extraterrestrial visitors. But now the Trump administration is working to put those theories to rest, with the White House press secretary trying to set the record straight in a statement she said was directly from the president. Well, the statement said that the drones flying over New Jersey in large numbers were all authorized for research and other purposes. She also noted that many of the drones were operated by hobbyists, recreational users, and private individuals who simply enjoy flying drones. Well, we can speak now to Michael Melham, who is the mayor of Belleville in New Jersey. Mayor Melham, it's great to have you with us again, because when we spoke to you in December, you sounded pretty alarmed by what was happening in the skies above your town. Are you now feeling reassured, having heard what we heard on Tuesday night from the White House?
Absolutely not. There's nobody here in New Jersey that's reassured, including the 500 mayors that are still waiting for answers from our state government, from our federal government. I'm glad that finally the White House issued a statement, but that statement was all of a sentence or two. And frankly, as I mentioned before, it's really disappointing to find out that we still have more questions than answers. Nothing's been settled yet, and we still have drones flying over our homes here in northern New Jersey.
Well, a couple of answers we do have, according to the White House, and indeed along the lines of what the Biden administration was saying back in December. No foreign involvement. This was not the work of the enemy. Those are two of the phrases that we extracted. That does leave the question, though, doesn't it? What were those objects flying in the skies?
And that's what we still have no answers for. And speaking about the federal government and what they've said, they've also said Homeland Security here in the United States had said there's nothing abnormal happening. They've also gone on to say that these are not federal operations. So you really got to listen to what they've been saying, and more so what they've not been saying. I mean, let's unpack that statement from Tuesday. It was only a sentence or two. I mean, really, it was the FAA authorized the drones that were flying over New Jersey for research and various other reasons. That was the totality of the statement. But there's a lot in there to unwind. First of all, the drones that were flying over New Jersey. I got news for the federal government. Drones are still flying over New Jersey. They were flying over my house on Tuesday night, and they were flying over my house on Wednesday night. Drones are still flying here. So when they use the past tense, that's alarming. Next thing, the FAA authorized them. Well, I got news for everybody. Anything in the sky over the United States is authorized by the FAA. That could be my personal drone. That could be a company drone. That could be a small helicopter. That could be a small plane. That could be a commercial plane. Anything in the sky is authorized by the FAA. So that statement meant nothing. But then the more concerning thing was research and various other reasons. Well, what are those various other reasons? Those are the questions that we want. We think now we know who. And I say we think we know who because we don't think it's foreign. We don't think it's extraterrestrial. But the FAA is not saying it was them. The FAA is not saying it's our military. All the FAA said is that they were authorized. So we still really don't know the who was authorized to do it. And more importantly, we don't know the what. A month ago, I came to the conclusion that these were probably federal assets, that these were probably something that belonged to us, our military, or a defense contractor. So I was no longer asking for the who a month ago. I've been asking for the what. And sadly, even after the statement that was released by the White House 8 days into President Trump's administration, we're still asking for what's going on. What is the research they're doing? And what does various other reasons actually mean?
And Mayor Melham, I mean, are you seeing fewer drones in the night skies now than you were, say, a month ago? Or is the situation really completely unchanged?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, depending on the night you look out, again, we don't have many clear nights here in northern New Jersey, especially this time of the year, but we did have a couple this past weekend, and every single time I look up at any time, including last night, including the night before, you can see drones in the sky. I'm not seeing the swarm that I saw in mid-December, let's just say, not seeing the swarm, but anytime at night, if the night is clear, I can look up at the sky and point out drones. And I vet those. You know, I now know what airplanes look like when they're landing in our airspace. I mean, keep in mind, where we are in northern New Jersey, in Belleville, New Jersey, we border the city of Newark. The city of Newark is the largest city in New Jersey. There's an international airport there, Newark International Airport. We're also dead smack in the middle of the airspace for JFK, for LaGuardia, and a regional airport called Teterboro. We're used to seeing things flying. We're used to seeing planes landing and taking off. We know what they look like. They have headlights on them. They have lights on them. These are just red and green blinking lights on the wings. And if you catch it at the right time, there's a second or so where they're completely dark. Planes are never completely dark, especially in this airspace. There's no reason for a plane to go completely dark. So if you're seeing something that looks like a small plane, and I think that's part of the issue. People are expecting, when we say drones, that it's those 4 helicopter type propellers or fans on the bottom of them. These are fixed wing aircraft. These could be 6, 8 feet. It's hard to tell from the ground, but they do look like planes. So if you do get a picture of them, people say, well, that must be an airplane. It's got wings on it. It is not an airplane. There's red and green blinking lights. There's no forward lights. And at certain times, if you catch the blinking right, it is completely dark. Those are drones. Those are not manned aircraft.
I just want to sort of get the sense of the mood in your town right now, because a month ago there were a lot of theories doing around, not just in Belleville, but right across New Jersey and in other states, I should add. People were coming up with all sorts of theories as to what those objects in the skies were, some of them pretty far-fetched. Have people calmed down a little bit more? Would you say that perhaps some of those theories have been laid to rest?
People have calmed down a bit, and sadly, I think that's just the generation and the time that we live in. The news cycle only seems to last 24, 48, dare I say 72 hours, and people are on to the next thing. You know, people on social media are used to a 15-second video clip, and then they move on to something else. So, and part of that may have very well been the plan. I mean, let's just see how long the people stay focused on this, because I do see that people are still concerned. People see me, they know I've been out there talking about it, so they do engage me. But I am thinking that the average resident knows what they saw a month ago. They still look up here or there. They know they're there. They must be trusting at this point, it's probably the federal government. I'm going to take them at their word. They're not really seeking the answer, because I do think the news cycle has moved on. And that's sad. So thankfully that, you know, I still have a bully pulpit. You know, I still have a mechanism. I still have media outlets and social media and people like yourself that are still engaging this story. And we are keeping the pressure on. Just 5 minutes ago, I ended a call with my congressperson who called me up to check in with me to find out, you know, what I'm thinking. And I told her, I said, listen, I was very disappointed in the Biden administration for basically telling me, my residents, and 500 mayors that we're nuts, we're seeing things, and it's all misidentification. I was not happy with the Biden administration. And I did take, and I still do take President Trump at his word. He has now spoken on this topic for 3 or 4 times. He said the federal government knows. He said the president knows. He said, I'll let you know within the first couple of days in office. Well, that took 8 days. I'm okay with that, but the statement doesn't cut mustard. We really need some more information. You can't just tell me that you knew the whole time. I mean, if the FAA did flight restrictions over 22 municipalities and then added a few more municipalities, I think they got up to 40 municipalities, but flight restrictions, literally saying that they can use deadly force to take down a drone, yet they forgot to mention that these drones that supposedly these flight restrictions were going to stop were authorized by them. Nobody's buying it that's paying attention to the story, and we have to keep the pressure on.
And just finally, Mayor Melham, I mean, you mentioned that, in fact, we haven't really heard anything new from the White House. There's nothing that came out of the White House statement that the Biden administration wasn't saying. But I'm just wondering whether you feel like people believe more what is being said by the Trump administration than believed the Biden administration, which you know, did have some issues when it came to communication, shall we say?
Yeah, so prior to Trump administration, Biden administration, I mean, I was told myself, I was on a call with the White House. 500 mayors were on a call, and we were told point blank, there's nothing. You guys are seeing things. It's misidentification. It's all personal drones. We were literally told there was not one credible report of an unmanned drone that they weren't aware of. So that was the first thing we were told. Then we were told by members of Congress, again during the Biden administration, members of Congress, somebody out there saying it's an Iranian drones landing on a mothership, off our coast. Then we had the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, pretty high-ranking guy, by the way, tell us it was China. So we did have messaging going on with the Biden administration. Trump said, I'm going to let you know what it was. Now Trump comes, and finally a statement comes out that basically acknowledged, for the most part, if you read between the lines, acknowledging that we were not seeing things, acknowledging that there were drones up there, but then they cover it by saying, well, they were authorized by the FAA to do research and various other reasons. And that's the part I have a problem with, because why didn't they just tell us that from the beginning, number one? And number two, those answers aren't enough. We want to know what the research is. Listen, we have areas in this country with miles and miles of acreage, tens of hundreds of miles of, Area 51 in Arizona, in New Mexico. We have deserts that experimental planes that everybody suggests are out there, 10, 15 years before we actually see them, which I believe that's where this stuff gets tested. Why are these drones hovering over such a densely populated area in an urban area like northern New Jersey? What is it that they're doing? That's what we want to know. But to answer your question more pointedly, I do think people at this point say, okay, the federal government is saying they were aware. It's not a foreign adversary. Okay. I think they're kind of okay with the cover story we're getting. And it kind of sounds like a cover story to cover the fact that the Biden administration didn't even have a cover story in place. But I do agree with you. I think people are now saying, okay, well, it's our federal government. They're up to something up there. I'm somebody who's always cautiously suspicious of anything the federal government does, and I kind of want to keep my eyes and ears on it. So I'm one of the people that want to know what they're doing just above my home.
Okay, well, I don't think we've heard the last of this one, but thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Michael Melham, Mayor of Belleville, New Jersey, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.